Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Benson. I'm very pleased to speak with you at this conference, and I look forward to joining you in person for the Q&A. Um, Here's my talk. And if anyone wants to contact me after this presentation, I'd be happy to communicate with you through email. So today I'll be talking about learners' multilingual assets, which many of you are familiar with, just kind of organizing them into a way to think about what learners bring with them to the classroom and how that can help teachers organize their instruction. I'll talk about current principles and practices in L1-based multilingual education and organizing MLE around the concept of transfer of skills between languages. I'll take a brief critical look at some of the things that are happening in MLE, and then I'll talk about creating positive backwash by assessing learners multilingually. So what are learners' multilingual assets for teaching and learning? Often what we see is mainly the challenging conditions, and people are worried about these learners. Over 40% of learners in the world, and it may be a much higher figure, experience a mismatch between the languages that they're familiar with from home and the language, often one language that's spoken in the school. Most of these learners are speakers of non-dominant languages, which means their languages are not always present in society or in formal settings in their countries. And these learners experience limitations to the kind of education that they can get based on intersectionality or the overlapping of factors like language, race, ethnicity, gender, etc. So intersectionality is an important concept, I think, because it affects different people differently depending on how many of these overlapping factors are present in their situations. But let's look at the positive side. What do they have? What do they bring with them to the classroom? And that's important because we want to build on whatever they have when they start school. So they come to school with linguistic, cultural, and experiential resources. That is, they bring something from home. They're not zeros when they enter the classroom. If they've already been exposed to a couple of languages, they have in their brains a kind of flexibility and awareness of languages that can be developed. They have funds of knowledge, which are cultural values and traditions that they have from their families and from their communities. And then also they have family support in their home languages. And we're often not able to tap into that support. And that's something that's also an asset and capability potential for education to make use of. Here's a few other important concepts from literature, and you'll see that I have references on the side for those of you who are scholars and you want to read more about these things. Richard Rees has talked about a language as resource orientation. So this is what I'm hoping that implementers of multilingual education will have, thinking of languages as resources and not as problems. I think it's also important to adopt a multilingual habitus or attitude or ideology. Multilingualism is good. Monolingualism is curable, as Tove Skutnov-Kangas used to say. We want to recognize learners' funds of knowledge from home. And Ofelia Garcia has this term, emergent bilinguals, which I'd like us to change to emergent multilinguals. Emergent meaning these skills will develop, and we want to develop literacy in languages as well as just the ability to understand and speak. So I want to just review the principles of multilingual education because I think sometimes we lose sight. We call a lot of things MLE that are not really doing all of these things. So my definition of L1 based multilingual education is that we use learners' home languages purposefully and systematically from the beginning. Those are their strongest languages. We build on those and to teach additional languages, which are sometimes called L2 or L3. We teach curricular content like the sciences, social sciences, mathematics in more than one language, depending on learners' levels. So we're using multiple languages for teaching content. And the aim is for learners to speak, read, and write more than one language and to master the content of the curriculum. So these are actually not always done in programs that are called MLE. I also use this analogy, a beautiful building from Cambodia, where the pillars are the L1 base skills. We build on those for second language and also for learning academic content. And then the overall learning is good, and learners are bilingual, multilingual, or biliterate and multiliterate. In this kind of program, teachers can be at their best. And I just use this example of a Cambodian teacher of Bunong. Khmer is the national language or official language of the country. And Bunong is one of the 5 indigenous languages, now 6 or 7, that are being used in education. And I just want to say that if any of you have been in classrooms where only a foreign language is used for instruction, only the L2, you'll see kids maybe not responding, or they'll be just reciting or repeating after the teacher. In this classroom, what we saw is children are reading from the word cards. They're negotiating the meaning of the word cards with the teacher, so they're talking about it. Everybody's engaged. They're not repeating after the teacher. And he actually tries to trick them by saying a different word when he shows a card. And the students say, no, that's not the word. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that you want to see in a classroom where everything is making meaning, everybody's on task. So MLE works because of interlinguistic transfer. And I want to talk about transfer a little bit because I think we don't pay enough attention to it. So interlinguistic or cross-linguistic transfer is the transfer of skills. So it's a cognitive process in learners' brains. It takes time. And it's this process where skills learned in one language transfer to another language. It explains why we only have to learn to read and write once. Even if the alphabets are very different or the writing systems, we only have to learn a concept once. Those things are part of our repertoire after we've learned them, and we can transfer them to additional languages as we learn those. So here are some of the skills that might transfer or that will transfer. Phonological awareness, so the awareness that a written symbol has a sound or a meaning. Being morphological awareness, the idea that certain parts of words have meanings. Metalinguistic awareness, the idea of how languages work and that you have to put parts of them together to make meaningful phrases or sentences. And conceptual knowledge. So you only have to learn a concept once. 2 + 2 = 4. We're going to know that in any language we learn. Here's a more complex model, but I think you'll see what I mean. If you look at all of the parts of reading comprehension, what do learners have to learn to be able to comprehend what they're reading? That's all of these parts down in the bottom: vocabulary, syntax, the idea of how meaningful sentences are made, orthography, the writing system, etc. Once we learn those things, and hopefully we're learning them in a language that we speak and understand well, we can transfer those skills to an L2, an L3, an L4, etc. So all of those skills can be developed in learners' best languages. I want to just talk a little bit, and some of you have seen these before. How can teachers facilitate transfer between languages? So often it's important to use comparative alphabets. So here, this is an example of Wolof alphabet right next to the French alphabet. These are an L1 and an L2 used in Senegal, and these are big posters on the wall of a classroom with pictures showing keywords, etc. So these are references, really important references for learners, and they can, with the teacher, they can work on which letters are the same, which ones are different, etc. There's an integrated alphabet that I just love. This is a French-German combined alphabet where the inner arches of the rainbow, let's say, are the letters that are the same. And even you'll see some of the keywords are the same. So the sounds are the same, the letters are the same. And then on the outer arches are the sounds and letters that are different. The ones in yellow on the right are those in German that actually don't even exist in Italian. And then on the left, the same thing, all the sounds and letters that exist in Italian that are limited in German or don't exist. Another example, this came from the Patani Malay Thai program in Thailand. And here they put the alphabets side by side and circled the letters that are the same. So there's many ways to do this. Other examples of how you can facilitate transfer is by having charts. Also, I would say on the walls for reference for learners to look at during their instruction, where you have comparison and contrast of how sentences are put together, how questions are put together, or maybe being able to ask those who, what, when, where, how questions. And these are just examples of the comparison contrast idea. So here's a little critique, and I know this is probably an issue in some parts of the Philippines as well as other countries, and that is that the early exit model. So this is current practice in many countries. It came from a historic use of L1 only for a short period of time in primary school. And I just want to warn about this. So early exit transitional model is a model where the L1 is used for grades 1 and 2. Maybe during grade 3, it's phased out, so much less use of it. And then by grade 4, often by grade 4, there's no more L1. It's erased from the curriculum. The switch is for everything going to L2. And then it forces implementers, including teachers, to say, when is the right time to transition or move from L1 to L2? Or, excuse me, even why aren't my learners, why aren't the students transitioning? So what early exit programs fail to do is they fail to build a strong L1 base for learning. The L1 should be, it is an asset for learners, and it should be an asset all the way through school. It should be something that they can count on for understanding and for basic literacy, at least. An early exit model fails to develop strong L1 skills in oral expression, reading and comprehension, writing and self-expression. Those skills aren't developed. There's not enough time in a couple of years to develop those skills alongside the L2. Really, writing skills are very important, and if they are not developed in the L1, students will struggle in their new languages. Early exit models also often fail to build strong L2 skills. So you actually want to start with oral, especially with oral skills development in a second language. And an early exit program fails to take the time that learners need to transfer skills. And that's why I talk about transfer and not transition. Transfer, that cognitive process, it needs time, and it needs both languages to develop so that skills can transfer between them. This is Kathleen Hughes' model developed based on research in African contexts. And what it shows is that early exit, which would be the orange here in the orange bar, where the L1 is only used for a short period of time, it's not likely to have very positive outcomes, as you can see, maybe 30% as opposed to 100% of success rate. And what you see is that the stronger and longer use of L1, represented by programs in the blue bars, is what will actually result in more success for learners across the curriculum and as in the additional languages, or L2, L3. So let's just talk about assessment and multilingual assessment. So first, I'd like to critique assessment in only one language, which is usually assessment in a dominant language. What happens when we assess only in a dominant language? Scores are low, and we don't know why. We don't know what L1 literacy skills have been developed that are available for transfer. We don't know if learners have content knowledge. And it has a negative backwash on teaching. As I was mentioning before, and you've probably seen, when teaching and assessing only in a dominant language, there's a lot of rote learning and memorization, repetition, and it can have a negative backwash on the education system because teachers, parents, everyone thinks, oh, we have to rush to give them more L2. So the underlying attitudes that this represents, this kind of assessment, is language as problem orientation, a monolingual habitus, that only one language is seen as important. So let's look at what multilingual assessment can do. What happens when we assess in the L1, the learner's best language or languages, and other languages, bilingually or multilingually? First, if scores are low, we know why. We know which L1 skills are available for transfer to the L2. We know if learners have content knowledge because they can express it in any or all of their languages. And then there's a positive backwash effect on teaching because there's a focus on interaction and meaning making, which you can do mostly very well in the home language and a little bit in second language as they're learning them. And then there's a positive backwash on the education system because the L1 is seen as important for all learning. The underlying attitudes represented by this kind of assessment are language as resource, taking a multilingual habitus, and that both or all languages are valued and important in education. So if you've heard that term, treasure what is measured, when you measure something or you assess it, if you do that in multiple languages, then you're showing that you value those languages. And also you're checking for what skills are transferring between those languages. So just wanted to give a little advertisement for this very free guidance paper that I was able to develop and invited by the Multilingual Education Working Group and UNESCO and UNICEF in the Asia Pacific region. So I just want to let you know that that's available. If any of you are implementing MLE, working with teachers, or thinking about assessment and multilingual assessment. So how can assessment effectively capture the languages and literacies and knowledges of emergent multilingual learners? So here's the logic of it all. So a good MLE program uses the L1 for initial literacy and content. It continues building the L1 while learners transfer skills into the L2. It facilitates transfer by comparing and contrasting languages. And then it leads to a multilingual forms of assessment, which document L1 skills that are available for transfer to L2, especially literacy skills. Allows you to assess L2 skills to see what's developing, what content knowledge has been used or learned by in the content lessons such as math and science. And I just want to note, just remind you that language learning, especially L2 learning, involves making mistakes. So if you have an assessment that only allows for correct answers, then you're not getting an entire picture of what learners can do. You need to think about the progress of learners and how they'll need to make errors along the way. But if you're allowing them to make errors and you're analyzing their errors, then you're actually seeing where they are in that process. So I'll talk a little bit about how to do that. I've mentioned this before, so sorry if this is a repeat for some of you, but we've been using this writing test, expressive writing assessment in a few countries, Cambodia, Senegal, and Myanmar. And what we looked at, we just asked learners, gave them lined paper in their classroom and asked them to write about a dream they had one night. So we gave them that prompt in the language, in their home language. And then for learners from, I think, grade 3 up, we actually had them turn the paper over and write about another dream in the dominant language. So in Cambodia, that was an L2 for them, Khmer. So we were able to look at these assessments and see how learners were spelling, writing their words. It showed problems that they might have in expressing themselves so that teachers would know just in general what skills might need to be retaught. And it also, this kind of assessment encourages teachers. It has this positive backwash because it encourages them to teach writing and self-expression, writing for meaning. So here are some results from Cambodia. I'll just show you grade 3 because then we can compare MLE and non-MLE learners, and we can also compare L1 results and L2 results. We looked at sentence length, spelling standards, and how much they actually described of their dreams. So here's the example. The top row is the MLE class, which was able to write multiple sentences in the L1 or a long sentence. Most of them could do that. And here's some examples. And then they could also write in the L2 Khmer, many of them could also write multiple sentences or a long sentence. So you can see that the skills that they've developed in the L1, they are definitely transferring to the L2 as learners are gaining vocabulary and other skills in that L2. If you look at the non-MLE learners, so that's the row at the bottom, we actually tried to test them in the L1, even though they weren't in an MLE program, but no one could really do that. They couldn't think of how to write their own language when they hadn't learned it. So then we tested them in Khmer, the language that they'd been taught in from the beginning, and they were only able to write, they copied the prompt from the board. So one night I dreamed that, and then they added one word, one noun. So this shows very distinctly these learners are from the same backgrounds. And if they're taught in their home language, they develop those skills in the home language, they can transfer them to the new language. If they're not taught in the L1, they have a real hard time expressing themselves in L2. Here's an example of what you can do if you don't demand perfection, a yes/no answer, or incorrect or correct answer. This is for a more elaborate assessment of I think it's for reading comprehension, where learners could have limited skills in one aspect, say making inferences, but then they could have really good skills in identifying cultural perspectives. So what you get is a circle or a mark at different levels depending on the criterion. So something like this would be for one learner to be assessed by each of those criteria. And finally, I wanted to show you a side-by-side bilingual assessment. This one's for natural sciences from my friends in Cape Town, at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. And this is the top of the worksheet, and I'll show the bottom in a minute. I couldn't get it all into one slide. But as you'll see, the left-hand side has the content in English, and the right-hand side has the content in isiXhosa. So here it has the text, then the keywords. There are no answers there. And then at the bottom, keywords repeated on the second slide. And at the bottom, there's an assessment. And what they did was allow learners to answer in either or both languages. And what they got is they got away from the teacher correcting language on a science test. And they also were able to show what learners really understood from the lessons. So I'd encourage you, if you're in a position to do this, experiment with side-by-side assessments because they're really revealing. So to rethink assessment with emergent multilinguals in mind, we want to assess literacy skills in both languages and really pay attention to what skills learners have in the L1. We want to look at how to demonstrate progress in a new language without requiring accuracy or complete accuracy, looking at skills along a continuum, allowing for errors, documenting those errors, and seeing progress along the way. We want to assess curricular content bilingually or multilingually to really focus on the meaning. Do they understand the concept of photosynthesis, or is it just a problem of expressing it in a certain language? And then I would challenge everyone to think about how to assess what we could call the superpowers of emergent multilinguals, which is that meta-linguistic awareness. How are they using their understanding of how languages work to have strategies for studying the second language, to have ways of maybe changing the languages they know to talk to someone who speaks a language that's similar, et cetera. Those are the kinds of skills that multilinguals have that monolinguals do not have. And we want to solve that problem for monolinguals. So in honor of International Mother Language Day, which was last month, I just want to share a quote by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who he's just always had very many wise words, and I wanted to read this to you. You don't say there are too many languages in the world. Languages are key to knowledge. The more languages you know, the more keys to treasure houses you have. If you know all the other languages and don't know your language, that is called enslavement. If you know your language and add all the other languages, that is called empowerment. And that concept is what keeps me going, and I hope it gives you some strength to continue the development of multilingual education for all learners. Thank you very much. I acknowledge some of my teachers and mentors over the years, some of whom are no longer with us, very important people in the field of multilingual education. And I include some references here. If anyone wants to have that PowerPoint, I'm happy to share, or the organizers can share. So thank you very much. And I look forward to talking to you and answering any questions or hearing any comments and feedback. Thank you.